Welcome to this week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast, where experienced professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders based in Kingston upon Thames are invited on to share their story with us. I'm your host, Amir Rochalina.
This week's episode of the Inside Kingston podcast is brought to you by Holland Harnham Wills, a financial planning and wealth management firm based in Kingston upon Thames. Holland Harnham Wills specialises in retirement planning for senior professionals and successful business owners. Visit hhw-uk.com to start feeling more relaxed and confident about your financial future.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. I'm joined today by Julia Trollip. Julia is a biokineticist and the founder of JT Biokinetics, a clinic that uses exercise as the main mode of therapy to treat orthopaedic injuries, chronic diseases, and lifestyle diseases too. What's unique about Julia is how suffering a horse riding injury made her change her university studies from a business degree to entering the field of biokinetics. And be sure to listen to the end, where Julia shares some important lessons with us on the power of being determined and resilient when running your own business. So whether you're interested in knowing more about biokinetics or would like to know more about what it takes to run a successful independent business, then I hope you enjoy this episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Welcome, Julia Trollip, to the Inside Kingston podcast. Julia, I'm really excited about this conversation because before coming across your business, I had never heard of biokinetics. So it's a great opportunity for me to speak to a professional like you to actually learn more about it. And I'm sure that our listeners will find it a really interesting discipline too. But to kick off this conversation, I'd like to go back in time if that's okay. So
Sure.
Where did you grow up?
Hi, Mia. Well, firstly, thanks very much for having me. So yes, I grew up in South Africa. I was very fortunate in that I grew up on a farm in a massive area called the Karoo. So I was very fortunate, as I say, grew up in wide open spaces, was very oblivious. Well, I had a very sheltered life in a good way. So yeah, has always been at boarding school because of where we lived, sort of in the middle of nowhere. So yeah, grew up in South Africa, did my schooling in South Africa, and then came over to the UK for 8 years before returning to South Africa to do my studies. So yeah, a bit of a...
That sounds amazing. I grew up in the Brazilian Midwest, so I'm fairly familiar with
awesome.
growing up in the middle of nowhere. And actually, I find it bliss. The middle of nowhere at times is actually bliss.
Total. Just a real way to clear the mind, isn't it? And
absolutely. Yeah. So Julia, you mentioned there your studies. Did you go to university? And if so, what did you study?
Right. So yes, I did go to university. But like I said, I first came and lived in the UK from 18 to 26 years old, where I was doing a variety of things.
Yeah.
And just to sort of might be merging things here, but prior to going to university and prior to coming to the UK, in my second last year of school, we'd had to do a work shadow where we spent a week following somebody who in a career that we were interested in, which is where I first heard about biokinetics. So just wanted to mention that because I'll get back to that later. But yes, so in the interim, had spoken to life coaches and career coaches and the like, and had sort of been advised that perhaps doing a business degree would be better for me, which is another learning curve. So I ended up taking their advice, and when I started in South Africa at Rhodes University in the Eastern Cape, I was doing a BCom initially with a view to studying chartered accountancy. And
right.
I attempted that a few times, tried to do my accounts too for a few years, and was very clear that I had no interest in it whatsoever. I probably could have done it if I'd applied myself, but I wasn't interested in it, so I didn't study it very well and very hard. And then from there went into, chose my majors to be economics and management. And again, same thing, I passed, and it was interesting to a degree, but it certainly wasn't my passion. So was very much a case of cramming the night before exams and just being fortunate enough to pass that way. And in the interim, because of a BCom is such a broad subject, when you've qualified with a BCom, where do you go? Where do you find a job? So I was just sort of kept studying another year, buying myself time. So I did my honours in financial and general management. And from there was about to start my master's in management. So that would have been my going into my fifth year of university. Also, just to mention again, somebody who absolutely hates studying, but I literally didn't know what to do next. So hence why it was easier to stay at university. But anyway, in that, while I was studying for my final honours exams and approaching my master's, I just thought, what on earth am I doing? I was hating my life. I wasn't enjoying the studying. I was miserable. I thought, I've always wanted to be a biokineticist. Why aren't I doing that? So I spoke to one of the deans and was told that if I wanted to, I could in the time it would take to do my 2 years master's, I could condense my human movement degrees. Yeah, so I then finished my undergrad human movement degree and went on to my honours in biokinetics, which I did in Port Elizabeth. And then following that, you do a year's internship before you can go out solely. So I did that in Port Elizabeth as well. So very long-winded, very long road to finally study what I wanted to do.
So let's pause there for a second, because this will be a good place in the conversation, Julia, for us to introduce biokinetics to our listeners. So
okay.
It's a discipline that is studied at university level in South Africa. And from as I said, my very basic understanding of it, it is a South African profession, isn't it? Or at least it came
Correct.
from South Africa, right? So tell us, a little bit about what is biokinetics.
Sure. So biokinetics it's you can only study it in South Africa, and essentially it came about, I think it was around the 80s, when they just realized that there was a bit of a lack, if I could, for want of a better word, of people were having treatments and their initial pain was being addressed, but their full movement and fully functioning further down the line, there was sometimes a gap. So biokinetics is it's a healthcare profession, so we're recognised by the Health Professions Council. We're part of an allied group of medical professionals, and essentially it's looking at the body as a whole. It's looking at the body biomechanically, so not just looking at a certain area, but how the whole body functions together. So it's looking at movement imbalances, it's looking at past injuries. But essentially what it is actually is it's trying to help somebody through exercise rather than relying on medication. So it has different categories or spheres. You've got your orthopaedic side where you are addressing sports or just lifestyle injuries.
Mm-hmm.
You then also have the chronic conditions, so things like Parkinson's, fibromyalgia, to your different cardiac conditions, to your pulmonary conditions, to your neural conditions, any of those conditions. And then your third, which is also sort of the lifestyle stuff. So could be obesity or people who are sedentary or issues that arise from that. And through all of those different categories, the main thing is that you can use exercise to influence a person's physiology. And there's lots of studies to show that rather than just taking medication. And I'm not, just have to clarify, I'm not saying that medication isn't always necessary, but there are a lot of times where medication isn't necessary, but it's just given because it's easier to do that. So exercise has a really massive or profound influence or effect on one's physiology. And I mean, you can reverse type 2 diabetes through exercise. And you can prolong a lot of conditions. I'm not saying you could say cure Parkinson's, but you could certainly prolong the effects it would have on a person. So again, essentially what biokinetics is also trying to do is to improve a person's quality of life, an individual's quality of life. So it's very much specific to the person. It's not a one size fits all.
Yeah.
So you have to take into account the person's background, where they're at now, in order to then determine what they'll be able to do. So it's giving people a quality of life and trying to prolong that quality of life for as long as possible, be it somebody who's suffering from a chronic disease. But then also what I didn't say either was we can deal with the elite athletes as well. So it's not just a reactive profession, it's also a proactive. So sorting out issues before they arise and become so much worse. It's promoting good movement.
Yeah. Julia, when I was preparing for this interview and reading into your own story, what struck me as quite interesting is that you've been on the receiving end of the benefits of biokinetics as well, haven't you? Could you tell us a little bit about how you used biokinetics as a patient following, I believe, what was a horse riding accident? Is that right?
Correct. Yes. So like I said earlier, I had heard about biokinetics before, but not again because I'd come from such a small area. I hadn't had much experience in it at all. So only discovered it when I did my work shadow week. But then, so that was when I was 17 years old, and when I was 18, I just finished school, and with the view to coming to England the following year. And I was helping out. I used to work at a riding school, and I was helping them out they were giving a holiday riding course. So I was helping with that. And I'd gone out one morning taking a group of kids out for an outride, and being 18 and being sort of fairly confident in myself, in my ability at the time, and getting onto a horse that I'd ridden plenty of times before, my boss had said to me, just be careful. I said, oh, he'll be fine. I went out on this ride and actually ended up having a really bad fall because of my own silly, just being too relaxed and not being aware. Anyway, again, because I was 18, I sort of thought I was invincible. So although my leg was black and blue and I was dragging it behind me, I was like, oh, I'll be fine. What I didn't realize at the time, and what I can appreciate now, is that obviously my body was then having to adapt and to figure out a way to continue to keep me moving and doing stuff even though I was in pain. So long story short, I didn't go and see a doctor. I didn't get help. I just rested it. It was over the Christmas holidays, so I guess I was just a lot less active than I could have been normally. So spent probably 2.5 years working in racing stables, and was really starting to struggle with back pain and stuff, but I just always dismiss it. Started getting treated, started having physio sessions, and each week I was seen by a different person, and each week I'd sort of have to spend the first 3/4 of the session going through my history and then 5 minutes of treatment. And unfortunately, just over time, nothing was changing and it was getting worse and worse. And the eventual conclusion was, well, you'll just have to stop exercising. And I was 24 at the time, so
wow.
that was a really, it wasn't very nice to hear at all. And just to say, I'd also been put on arthritic medication. They tried various different things, acupuncture. Like I said, 24 on arthritic medication, all these different things. So you start to think, gosh, there's actually something really wrong with me. Anyway, I then eventually gave up on that because it wasn't really helping me. Spent a few more years here in the UK, and that's when I then moved back to South Africa and started studying. And it was there that actually at university there was a biokineticist practicing at the on the campus. Her clinic just happened to be there, so I started going for treatment with her, and she started me from the real basics. I mean, just really basic, simple exercise. And slowly over time, she built me back up to where I was literally able to run again 3 times a week. I was rowing, I was doing CrossFit. I'm a spinning instructor, so I was instructing 3 high intensity classes a week. I was doing personal training. I was doing loads of stuff. Obviously that took time to build me up to that. But had I just listened to the advice when I was still over here, I probably wouldn't be doing anything right now. So I'm so grateful to Andrea for showing me that there was actually a way, and at the time working with her, obviously chatting to her about my interest in biokinetics, and she was sort of relighting that spark, so to speak. And I'd often chat to her about changing degrees, and it was really with her encouragement as well that I then took the plunge and thought that's my passion. I've always wanted to help people, and and then having experienced my sort of, well, having gone through my experience here, my goal was to come back here and to show, because I think there's so many people who are being told, there's nothing that can be done. And obviously there are going to be times where there's something severe, but I think in a case like mine, where it was really something very insignificant in the grander scheme, there must be loads of other people experiencing the same thing. And unfortunately then just believing that, and that restricts them a lot, and will promote a lot more problems in the future. So that was
That's
how I
fascinating.
experienced it.
That's really fascinating. So, Julia, bring us to the present now. Tell us a little bit about your business today.
Sure. So I my clinic is JT Biokinetics. I'm based at the Coomwood Golf Club in Kingston, and I started out on my own in June 2018. At first, I was working at the leisure centre in Tolworth. I'd been told by somebody that I'd done some work with that there was a room going there. So hence how I sort of started getting into the area, because I actually live in Reigate. And Tolworth wasn't perhaps the best area for me to be in. And I was looking at other areas, and somebody had been in touch with me for marketing for one of the Coomwood brochures. And that's kind of how I just heard about there. So I landed up there not through not doing very much research at all, but more just kind of, on a whim. And so I'm very fortunate in that I work with a brilliant nutritionist. She's been very good in referring clients to me, because the challenge is over here is that biokinetics isn't known. It isn't recognized. So when people hear the term, they're not going to pick up a flyer or something that says biokinetics. So that has been a challenge for me, and a learning curve for me in how to market myself and how to get my story out there. So that's a work in progress. So still building up contacts and things like that. But it is, 18 months down the line, I'm still here, and it is growing. So I'm really grateful for that.
Julia, when I was doing some preparation for this interview, the thing that really strikes me as different in the discipline of biokinetics is that the mantra seems to be that exercise is the best medicine, rather than maybe trying to treat the symptoms with some form of medicine. Now, granted that there are case studies and different parts of the medical field or the sort of health and well-being field will look at things in a different way. But for the benefit of our listeners, could you give us an example or two of some client case studies where biokinetics has helped them?
Sure. So I'd love to. Yes. So I think I've got so many. I've got so many favorites as well. But a lady that I've been treating, she's in her mid-40s, and actually she had a horse riding accident as well 15 years ago. She had numerous falls in the past, but on this particular occasion, she'd broken her back. So obviously that was pretty severe. And again, she was in the system, and she was having rehab and just getting really, really frustrated. So she actually took her own rehab on by herself. And I'm pretty certain I'm correct in saying it took her about a year to be able to walk again. And from there, she slowly built up and got back to her exercising, and she's back to doing high intensity interval training. She was running, etc. And then about 4 years ago, and she also has a young family. She has a good job up in the city, so she's that comes with its stresses and things as well. So she's a very proactive woman, and which is why I also believe she's doing so well now, is because she has this determination. But anyway, she'd about 4 years ago, the wheels had started coming off again, and she got to a point where her right leg was almost not her own. It would just shake out and kick randomly, to the point where she'd even kick her husband in bed, kind of thing. It was really just doing its own thing. And obviously this was brought on a lot of problems. She's having a lot of pins and needles and pain down her legs. Her shoulders were aching, and it was creating problems. She couldn't walk for any period of time. She couldn't stand for any period of time. She travels into London 4 days a week, so sitting on the train or being on the train was awful for her. So it was really starting to affect her quality of life, and yet she was still working, etc. And she'd been to see loads of different people, and she heard about me a year before I started seeing her, and I surmise this, but I think she just thought, well, it's just another, it's just something else to try. But then things got really bad, and I saw her for the first time, and I think it was September last year. And anyway, I think the key difference was that I really focused on her previous history. And in that time, discovered that she'd had loads of different falls. She'd broken most of the joints on the right side of her body. And just to say, she's a brilliant horse rider, but she enjoys the crazy horses. So hence all the falls, not from being incompetent, but she'd done numerous damage to her body in the past. So the broken back, was just one of many, many injuries. And I think my guess is that what had been happening a lot was that was the main focus, was just the broken back. And she'd been told that yes, there were neural problems, but that was just it. And she'd actually eventually been put on antidepressants and medication. And I think sort of, again, this is my interpretation, but I think led to believe that a lot of it was also in her mind.
Right.
Which, that's and again, for people who perhaps don't have as much determination or as confident as she is, they might just believe that and then start to really sort of, oh, well, I'm just depressed, or it's my fault, whatever. So anyway, we started working with this lady, and within a session or two, the leg had stopped shaking.
Wow.
And we discovered that actually although a lot of the symptoms were on her right side, it was actually her left side that was causing a lot of the problems. So we've been slowly just retraining her body how to work, essentially, because she's developed all these different compensations to allow herself to keep moving and to keep doing things. And yet those compensations haven't necessarily been good for her. And hence they're now causing problems. So we've been working on retraining her body, so to speak, building up strength in the weak muscles, not just focusing on the symptoms, but actually looking at where the original cause came from. And that's broken ankles back in the day and broken knees. And, she's broken her elbow, she's broken her jaw, which affects her balance. And there's it's a complex case. But yeah, she's about 12 sessions in and she's doing fantastically now. So yeah, so that's a really, one of they're all my favorites, but that's been a great one to watch because the change has been dramatic.
That's fascinating. Julia, it seems to me that one of the biggest barriers of people keeping fit over time is sort of the lack of regularity. So how do you motivate your clients to really keep at it with these prescribed exercises?
Sure. That's a good question. And it's a tough one. It's one of my challenges because a lot of people just say, oh, I don't have time. I think the main thing is that when people start to see results, they become more motivated. So if they can see a change, so if they've just been given generic exercises and they feel better for a while and then, issue slowly creeps back, they probably think, oh, it's not really working anyway. There's no point in doing it. That's the one sort of group of people. So if you can give exercises where they see that there is change, I think that does help with motivation as well. And I think one of the important things is also to look at what the person wants to get back to doing. So they're going to be, if they say, for example, can't run at the moment and yet running is their therapy, or they want to run a marathon, you need to tap into that as well, and you need to give them a goal. So they need to see the bigger picture and where they're headed with the exercises. So hopefully they'll then be more motivated to stick with them. So I always try to do that. It is challenging because life gets in the way and people forget to do them, and time goes by, and so they don't always see the benefits of it. But I think it's important, like I said, to figure out what it is the person wants to get back to doing, and to then tailor exercises so that they can see they have a plan, and that they can see, well, when they're able to do this, we can then move them on, and that hopefully engages them more.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And it also strikes me, Julia, that especially in an age where mental well-being is such at the forefront of people's focus and employers' focus, one's physical ability and ability to move freely with their body becomes an essential part of that mental well-being as well, doesn't it?
It sure does, and that's such a good point. And I've always known that there's, that when you're working with an injury, it's not just about the body, but I'm appreciating more and more that you've got to take into consideration the mental and the emotional aspect as well. So I might be digressing a bit on this, but you have to take that into account, because very often somebody might physically be improving, but mentally, because they've got this negative block or whatever it is, that has an influence on their progress. So yeah, it's so important to tap into that and to just really get on top of, to understand the bigger picture, because they feed into each other. So if they're struggling, then physically that's going to have an impact. And yet physically, if you can improve them physically, then that automatically has a benefit to their mental health. So it's very much interlinked, and you very much got to take that into consideration when you're trying to help a person and trying to rehab them.
Yeah, absolutely. Julia, what are some of the key business lessons that you've learned throughout your life?
So I always laugh at this because, like I told you earlier, I have a business degree, so I should have serious business knowledge and skill, but I also mentioned that I didn't apply myself very well, and that's definitely showing now. I think the biggest thing I've learned is surround yourself with successful people. Success breeds success, and ask questions. I've been very fortunate in the last year and a half in the people I've met. I became involved with the Kingston Chamber of Commerce, and they're fantastic people in there. I won't mention names in case I forget one or two, but they have been phenomenal in just in being a support and being an encouragement and helping build contacts and pointing me in the right direction. They've been fantastic. There's been loads of other, I'm part of a few other networking groups as well. And then just talking to people, I think that's really made a massive difference. But I always jump into things without thinking. So I'm learning that slowly, sort of the hard way, that you've got to think before just spending money or whatever. So I've definitely still got a long way to go. But I think the main thing, my main one is, surround yourself with people who are successful, who run their own businesses, who understand, and who are happy to share their knowledge. And hopefully one day I'll be able to do that in return to somebody starting out.
Absolutely. When you look back at your career journey today, what are you most proud of?
I think it's the probably determination. There are days when I think, gosh, I'm never going to make this work. But if I look back to just my life in general, since I first came to the UK, I've always stuck things out. I've always made them work in the end. So I think I'm proud of the fact that when I've thought, oh, this is impossible, I should close down, when people have said to me, don't do that, I've managed to still make it work. I think it's just maybe it's just not letting it. There've been a lot of days when I thought, golly, it'd be so much easier to just be employed. But it's just just my sheer resilience. I think that's the main thing. I'm proud of my resilience, and I'm proud of the people that I've met along the way and who I've been able to help. And I hope I can continue to do that.
And that's obviously reflected not only in your attitude, but also in the testimonials you get for the work you do in your business, Julia. So absolutely well done on that. What's next for you and your business? Are there any projects in the pipeline that you can tell us about?
Sure. So I think a big one, so there's no time frame to this one, unfortunately, but I really would. There are biokineticists here in the UK, but I really want to get it more well known. I want to get it out there. I want people to start, when they hear the word, I want them to start knowing what it is. At the moment you just get such funny looks, and what is that? And so that's a big project that that I'm slowly working on in the background. So I'd like to get it recognized by insurance companies over here, because unfortunately it's not. So that's those are big projects, but I think sort of more more, what's the right word? The more current ones would be just growing. I have started working at a multidisciplinary clinic in Isha on a Friday, which I'm really excited about, because I'm hoping that will just broaden, create more awareness. But I think I'd like to get more involved locally as well. I'd like to start finding a way to offer something back now that I'm sort of becoming a bit more established. Lots in the pipeline, just trying to figure out where to go, what would be the best place to start, really.
Exciting times ahead.
Very, yes.
Good. Julia, as we start to wrap up, I'd like to ask you a few quick fire questions that our listeners are always interested in. So, What do you do to relax outside of the office?
So I love my cycling. I took cycling up, road cycling I'm just going into my third year of it now. So I try to get out on my bike as often as possible. I like just being out in the open. So if cycling isn't an option, then going for a walk, or I think we're surrounded by the most amazing scenery in Surrey. So I like to get out into the Surrey Hills or into a park or something like that. Spending time with my family, my 3-year-old niece. So yeah, having coffee with friends, but just trying to get out as much as possible. Really, being outside is the main way that I relax.
That's great. Are there any books that you've recently read that you'd recommend to our listeners?
I seem to start books and then not finish them because I always seem to be too busy. But I think one of the books I was thinking about that earlier is The Tattooist of Auschwitz. I read that perhaps a year ago now, actually. It feels more recent, but I just love the fact that this guy, he was in the most horrendous of situations. I mean, you couldn't get any worse, and he only died in 2006. So it's incredible that that there was somebody who until recently had actually then continued a life. But the way that his mental attitude got him through Auschwitz, and just the way he then forged a life and a career for himself outside of that. I just really admire that.
That's fascinating. I'll definitely look into that one.
And it's a really good read.
Yeah. Are there any movies or TV shows that you've recently watched that you'd recommend to our listeners?
Again, this I watched a few weeks ago, actually, was Andy Murray, the documentary on Andy Murray resurfacing. I found that really interesting. I think a lot of people have an opinion on him just, from his tennis style and his sort of, just the way he's conducted himself in the past. But I think that was a really interesting insight into, what a professional athlete goes through. So I really enjoyed watching that. I don't watch many movies, to be honest, and I always forget movies when I have watched them. So I'm a bit poor on that front. I guess the other most recent movie I watched was Frozen 2 with my niece. So yeah, if you've got children, take them to that, but I wouldn't recommend it otherwise.
Good. Finally, where can people go to find out more about you and your business?
Sure. So my website is www.jtbiokinetics.com. And I'm also just in the process of getting my Facebook page more active, and that's JT Biokinetics. So yeah, if anybody would like more information, they're welcome to get hold of me on there.
Fantastic. And for the benefit of our listeners, Julia, I'll make sure that I add those resources to the show notes.
Lovely. Julia, thanks very much, Amir.
No worries. Julia, thank you for joining us here on the Inside Kingston podcast. It's been a pleasure getting to know your story.
Well, thanks very much for talking to me, and thanks for the opportunity to do so.
That wraps up another episode of the Inside Kingston podcast. Make sure to check out our guests' website, pay them a visit, and help spread the word about what they're doing. If you have any questions or know someone who should be a guest on the show, please feel free to get in touch. I would also love it if you could go to iTunes and leave us a review and a 5-star rating. We work hard to bring on some great guests, and getting a review from you is one way to help the podcast rate well on iTunes so that others can find and enjoy the show too. Thanks for listening.